All right, so let's create our first Android Studio project where we actually edit some things, build an interface, and add some functionality. So you've been using REPL to start your coding work, and now we're going to use Android Studio to build some UI stuff and to, of course, make it functional. So I'm going to first start by starting a new Android Studio project. I like to use the empty activity, and I'm just going to use a name like input output application. And I'm fine with using this version of Android. And it's going to take a little bit, but it should build my project. If you remember from last times, if you have an error, it's easy to fix and simply go through and correct the build. Usually the number one error that happens is that your build will not have the right version of Android installed, the right Android SDK, and so you have to manually add that in your preferences. We covered that in a previous video. So we're actually in Android Studio, and I just want to quickly cover some of the interface elements. The bottom of the screen is really where our debugging happens. We have this build menu, we have a terminal, we have a to-do list system, and for now we can just close out of this. This is really just going to show us whenever we have errors. So I'm just going to click that build that's highlighted, and it should go away. If I click it, it'll pull it back up, and there's other menus inside here that we can play around with, such as printing this stuff off or working with other things. So I'm going to click that build, and it goes away, and then I have on the left-hand side a series of buttons right here. Layout captures, build variants, favorites, structure. We're not going to use any of those in this class, so don't worry about them. Above that, we have a resource manager. We're also not going to be using that, but basically it helps you monitor your resources, such as how many images you're using and things like that. Then we have our project. Our actual project exists right here, and that's what's currently highlighted. If I click it, it'll disappear. But the project is basically all of the files inside our project, and we can easily access them here just by twirling down different folders. So if I had, for example, in my resources folder, I had various images or things like that, I could pull those out. But for now, we're going to be using this main activity file right here primarily. So there's other ways to hop around this. Up here, again, we'll be getting into this stuff more. I just want you to be familiar with it this first time. This is kind of our main window where we're going to be doing the majority of our work. Right now I'm in the main activity, which is this file right here. And that's the main activity.kt file, which is a .kotlin file. So we are working within the Kotlin language, not Java. You are welcome to work in Java. I just like teaching Kotlin because it's new and fresh, and I think it's an interesting language to learn. So we have our main activity right here. This is where all of our code is going to live. And as we work with it, this will grow larger. There's some UI things that I'll talk about a little bit later. And we also have another tab that's currently open called the activity_main.xml. And if I click that, it moves me to the activity.xml interface. And basically the activity interface allows you to edit your UI, and not only edit it using a visual editor, but also editing it using a text editor. This is very close to almost like web design, where you're laying out elements on text over here that are then being laid out here. Personally, I don't use this too often. I mostly use the design view. And the design view has a lot of different parts, which we'll get into in just a little bit. So we also have this Gradle button right here. Gradle is basically like it's almost like a way to compile your things. We have a device file explorer. If you plugged in a device or a virtual device, you could see those files here. We have an event log down here. This is where whenever we push and pull our GitHub stuff, it'll appear there. And then we have a breadcrumb trail of the current file that we're in. And above that, we have some of our tools. This is where I kind of want to draw your attention. Really briefly, there's also a login right here. But anyways, this is where I primarily want to draw your attention. So on your screen, it probably says none right here, or it doesn't say Pixel API 28, it might say something else. This is the kind of simulator area. So for this, if you don't have an Android device, or if you don't want to use your own device, you'd rather use something on the computer, you can use what's called a simulator or emulator in this case. And we can do that by selecting a device from this menu, which again, you may not have any, and I'll show you how to make one of those in just a second, and hitting this run button. And that will run all of our code, it'll compile everything, and then we can test out our code. So I will show you that in just a second. How do I actually add a device here? The best way is to open up the AVD manager. Whenever you click that, it opens up your list of virtual devices, and if you don't have any, it should say create virtual device. And if you go through that system, you can find the device that you'd like to use. For this class, I'm going to be using a Pixel, and I'm just going to be using the Android 28, which is Pie, Android 9.0 release. It doesn't really matter for this class which one you use, but once you get deeper into development, you can decide if you need a specific feature on maybe NuGet or something like that, you can use that. I hit next a couple times, it brings me to this view. We'd like to use the portrait view, not the landscape. Give it a name if you like, and I'll hit finish. That will add the device here, and we'll have our device ready to run. So to test your device out, make sure this says app, and make sure this is selected on your Pixel or whatever device you've created, and hit the play button. It's going to run, and it may have already started up actually whenever you initially added the device. Kind of depends. And it'll go through this whole process of actually running a little phone on your computer. I will caution you to make sure you have your laptop plugged in if you're using a laptop. This is pretty resource intensive. It's going to boot up the phone, and it may boot directly into your app. If it doesn't, go ahead and just click. So like for instance, if you just see this screen, go ahead and click the, go back to this interface, and you can click the play button to run it again. It'll run it again. So there I can see my application. There's the name of the application, input, output, app. There's the text that I was playing with over here. And this is a fully working phone. I can open up the camera. I can play with these different settings over here, like rotating it and seeing what happens, which our app doesn't have any rotational capabilities, so it's not going to adjust. And if I want to stop it from running, I just hit this stop button. Now that does not close the device, and I want to keep that in mind. So your battery will continue to drain. However, it will stop the program from running if you're stuck in a loop or something else like that. To actually close out of the device, I can hit this X and say no, I don't like to save it, just to save some space. And it should completely close out of the device. So that's the main thing I want you to set up. This is the build button right here, by the way, which basically checks everything and says, yep, your project is good to go after it runs through all of this stuff. So there's play, pause, stop, replay. You can monitor your system resources here by profiling your app, meaning you can see how much resources it uses. We have a few Gradle things right here we're not going to worry about. And this also involves pushing and pulling if you use a version control system like we are in this class. We can save our project here. But basically, that is the entirety of the user interface.